If you're considering buying one of these, chances are you want to take it out to places like this on the weekends, but at the same time during the week, this thing's going to be joining you on the daily grind, work and back, dropping off the kids, all of that kind of family stuff. But you might be skeptical as well. Is this GWM Tank 300 up to the job over the long term? This is a relatively new brand in Australia. It's a brand new model and we don't know necessarily that much about it. Well, we've got a long-term review of this exact car here just behind me. We've already put a lot of Ks on it. We've found out a lot about this Tank 300. Not all of it perfect, by the way. And in this part one of our long-term review of the GWM Tank 300, we want to tell you what we've found out to start with, but also run you through a lot of other things that you will want to know about this car, and also throw out some questions to you as well. What do you want to find out via us about this car while we've got it on the road? One thing I find most exciting about this Tank 300 is its potential as an off-road vehicle, how capable it is. And we're out in the bush at the moment. We've been doing some driving. We've found out a fair bit so far. So let's have a first look at how off-road capable this Tank 300 is. The car we have here is the GWM Tank 300 Ultra, which is the more expensive variant of the non-hybrid options. There's also the Lux Spec, which is priced from $46,990 drive away, but our up-spec model costs $51,990, which is also drive away. It's powered by a 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol engine, which makes 162 kilowatts and 380 newton meters. It runs through an 8-speed automatic gearbox and part-time 4-wheel drive system. And we've been averaging around 13 litres per 100 Ks so far in our tenure. Standard equipment we like so far is definitely the infotainment display, which measures in at 12.3 inches and is of good quality. There is a digital display of the same size in front of the driver, but it is a little bit more limited in terms of its functionality. And another thing we love about the Tank 300, of course, is the standard locking differentials front and rear. It's just awesome to have those on a four-wheel drive. There is a more powerful and potentially more efficient hybrid powertrain option as well for the Tank 300, but it costs $10,000 more than what we have here. That makes it a little bit of a tough sell. So like I said, we've been driving this Tank 300 for a couple of months already over the Christmas break, putting a lot of Ks on the car actually, and using it as mostly a family vehicle around town and also up and down the highways. Some first impressions of living with this car. Number one, yellow number plates, in my opinion, can get in the bin. I appreciate that GWM have actually screwed this number plate down in 4 places, because sometimes they're just done with 2 at the top, and you go through a water crossing, that comes flying off and you've got to dig around to find it. Ask me how I know, but in this case, this is screwed on pretty well. But if it was me, I'd be definitely changing the style of the number plates to look a little bit better. The 360-degree camera is actually really good in this car, especially considering the price point. This thing's about 55 grand drive away, but I've seen worse systems on much more expensive cars. And it actually makes the thing quite easy to park. The wheelbase isn't that big. You can see what's going on. Visibility is pretty good and all that sort of thing. So this vehicle in a shopping centre car park sort of scenario is actually pretty good. Now, another thing that you notice after putting some Ks on the car, have a look at the front wheels and then check the back wheels. These front pads actually seem to produce a lot of brake dust. So if you're going to be driving this car, putting lots of Ks on it, expect to be cleaning these a little bit more often than you might consider normal. Just one thing to note, I suppose, after spending some time with it. But I do love Michelin tyres. These are a Michelin Primacy tyre. Good quality tyre, and it goes a long way to improve the overall offering of a vehicle, I think. If GWM chose to fit a cheaper tyre, maybe a lower quality tyre, I think this car would be less impressive to drive, but I do appreciate these. They're actually not bad off-road as well, which is pretty good. Some people have reservations about the tailgate of the Tank 300 because it's side hinged, it's one piece, and it does swing out a long way. But I've got to say, after spending time with this car, I don't actually mind it so much. You might be in a really tight car space where it is an issue, but we haven't found that while we've been driving around with it. But I do like the good amount of access you get into the boot of this Tank 300 when it is open. Now, if you're parked on a slope or if it's really windy, you do have this here. That locks it closed. It does work quite well. There's a couple of little hooks and things around the place. We haven't really used those much. Another thing I haven't used at all, which is probably not that much of a surprise, is that camping table which is buried in here. You might remember it from another review we've done on the Tank 300. It folds down to pretty small. It is a cool feature to have, but I've got to tell you, I've never actually used it once. Now, I don't expect to use it either, to be honest with you, because it's often buried under stuff in the back. But let's see if that changes in the future. One thing I do like about the boot is actually how usable the space is. It doesn't actually look that big in terms of length, especially in comparison to other large SUVs. But because it's tall and wide, if you're happy to load things up in here a little bit, you can fit a fair amount of stuff. I fit 2 kids' bikes into the back here, one with training wheels, one without. Yes, one's learning how to do it. And also I fit a decent sized pram and lots of presents and gifts for the big road trip. We're a family of 5, don't forget. So if you're smart about it, this boot is actually pretty good. Now, excuse the mess, but I have actually left this car a little bit dirty just to show you what it's like living day to day in terms of storage and that sort of thing. Now, one thing to talk about here, 2 cup holders, they're actually hiding here behind the gear shifter. Does work pretty well there. There's 2 and they do fit a decent sized bottle. I have fit one of those big Yeti coffee cup thermal things just in there. They only just fit. But if I move this out of the way, I can actually slide this little tray forward. That's got my wallet, a bunch of receipts and some kid's toy or something like that in the way there at the moment. It does work pretty well, and there's a fair amount of room there actually to absorb a lot of stuff. And also there's a small vent actually, if you don't notice on the first time you look in this car. If you want to keep a sandwich or something cool like a drink in there, you can actually vent cold air into this little area here to keep that a little bit cool. It does work pretty well. Now here, we tend to use this space. There's charging cables galore, but we use it as just general storage. That is a wireless charging pad there, but we just tend to plug our phones in, so we don't use that too much. My wife's sunnies are there. You can actually put those up there to get them out of the way. Let's see if they fit. I've never actually tried. There you go. That's a bit of a win, I think. But otherwise, I think in terms of general storage, the door bins in this Tank 300 are reasonably big. You can fit a reasonably big bottle in there, or in our case, just a bunch of crap that you tend to leave lying around, like snacks and nappies and all of that sort of thing. In terms of build quality, I have no issues with this Tank 300 so far. It does feel pretty good. We've put a few thousand Ks on the car so far. There's no squeaks, there's no rattles, there's no inherent issue in terms of the way this car is put together so far, but we'll see if that changes any time in the future. Now here's a quick look at the second row of the Tank 300 with 3 baby seats fitted. Now it's worth pointing out that we've actually gone to the effort of buying 2 baby seats. These 2 here, they're relatively narrow overall. And we bought these because, well, we're jumping in and out of different cars quite often, so we want a bit of flexibility. But if you do have 5 people in your family, you've got 3 young kids and you do want to look at a Tank 300, check it out. It is possible to fit all 3 into the back here. It is reasonably snug. I'm not using ISOFIX points here at the moment. These are all belted in, these seats, just so you've got a little bit more flexibility with where you can put them in terms of the seat positioning. But I can tell you, kids in the back here, we've even got a rearward facing right on the passenger side there. You can sit in the front, you've got enough leg room, there's air vents, there's power points. It's all pretty good. One thing I will note though is that this test car doesn't have any floor mats, and well, my kids make a horrible mess in most cars they go into, and this carpet did take a fair bit of effort to vacuum out. So I would be negotiating with the dealer for a set of floor mats, or at least budgeting in, going to Super Cheap Auto or something like that, and throwing a set of mats in, because then it'll be a lot easier to keep clean over the long term. Let's have a quick look underneath the Tank 300, because quite often on 4-wheel drives you don't get a good look at what's going on underneath, and it's such an important thing, especially if you want to do a lot of long-term off-roading. Now this actually looks pretty good overall. What I do like to see is that there is a fair amount of protection underneath this Tank 300, particularly up the front. So your steering, your radiator up the front there is protected by bash plates. Now I'll just pop my wedding ring off, bit of a squeeze, but you feel that there. It's all metal as well. Sometimes they're plastic, so they look good, but they don't offer that much protection. These are steel, they look reasonably sturdy. They've had a few knocks already off-road. Whoever's been driving this before, we've got it. I'll note that the diff up the front here isn't actually protected. That looks like a cast aluminium diff housing there. You might want to look at getting a plate for that, maybe if you're going really hard off-road and bouncing this thing around a lot. It does look reasonably sturdy, but I don't know how it would go with big direct hits. So one thing worth noting there, but the gearbox is nicely protected. This runs all the way back here, and even the fuel tank here, that is metal as well actually. So that'll take a bit of a better hit than plastic, I think. So the most unprotected thing under here would probably be things like the mufflers and these lower control arms towards the back here, which is kind of inherent for a lot of vehicles. But in terms of a ladder chassis four-wheel drive, this looks pretty well sorted underneath in terms of being able to take a hit, but also being able to slide and not get hung up too much on obstacles off-road. So here's the rear suspension of the Tank 300. It's got coil springs and it uses a live axle, which is generally speaking really good for off-road. So this is the panhard rod here. It is nice and long, and these are generally speaking pretty good for articulation and stability off-road, allowing a lot of movement between both sides. And you've got up control arms hidden up here. They're a little bit shorter and on an angle, and then your lower control arms as well. They're a decent length, I suppose. Nothing crazy, but this is similar to what you get in a lot of four-wheel drives with a live axle at the back. Now, one thing I note here is that generally ground clearance is pretty good. The shock absorbers, you can see one here, that sits down a little bit low in comparison to the rest of the undercarriage. I think GWM have done that because they just want to fit a long shock absorber in terms of overall length. And so that does sit down a little bit. It is right near the wheel, so I think you'd be doing pretty well in terms of getting hung up on those, but it is worth noting regardless. But otherwise, I think this is a good classic off-road four-wheel drive suspension setup. Now, the Tank 300 might look a bit like a Jeep Wrangler, but one big question I've got is, does it perform the same as a Wrangler off-road? One of the big things with this car, obviously, is the fact it's got diff locks front and rear from the factory. Currently got hill descent control working down a hill here at the moment. That does work reasonably well. You can hear it chewing away there at the front wheels, just slowing things down. When things get really steep, it's not really sharp enough. You do have to get on the brakes, but it's not too bad to have there, I think. But as I was saying, diff locks. There's not many cars out there at the moment that have diff locks fitted front and rear from the factory, and it's the major strength of this Tank 300 straight off the showroom floor. But it's not a one-trick pony either. There is a little bit more going on in this car to make it a good off-road option. The first one, gearing. I'm in low range at the moment, and the calibration of things like traction control and that sort of thing. You've got a bunch of different drive modes here, and once you're in low range, you can run through to things like rock crawl. There's a mountain mode, there's a mud and ruts one as well. And rock crawl in particular, that's what I've been using today, and it does really help you give nice measured throttle inputs. It holds the gears, and it just makes the car a lot more approachable and manageable when you're off-road. So that is a really good thing. And this 2-litre turbocharged engine, 8-speed automatic gearbox, it's pretty good around town, but it's also not bad off-road as well. It's definitely not a high revving car. It gives you a nice little push of torque towards the low RPM range there. And I think it works well enough. It's definitely not geared as low as a Wrangler Rubicon, for example. I mean, it hasn't got the tyres, and it hasn't got the live front axle. So this is independent front suspension. There's a live axle at the rear. So it's more in common in terms of suspension with something like a Ford Everest, Toyota Fortuner, most of the dual cab utes out there. And it does bring a little bit, I think, of an imbalance between the front and rear suspension. The rear suspension is pretty supple. It does do a lot of the work. The front doesn't articulate as much, and I was doing some climbing before, and you'll notice that the thing does lift wheels a little bit. Not massively. It does feel pretty stable and even from behind the wheel, though. I think it doesn't feel like one of those cars off-road that seems to flop and bounce around too much. You do feel in control from behind the wheel, and general ground clearance for a stock standard vehicle with decent on-road manners, it's actually really good. This thing feels confident, and I've driven a couple of harder sections today. It's done absolutely fine. I think it's got more in the tank, and I want to do more in this car actually. So in future installments, it might not be video parts of the review. It might just be me getting away on a weekend to find a track and see if this thing will drive up it. But I'll be able to put this thing through its paces even more from an off-road point of view. And I'm looking forward to it as well, because there's a few tracks I want to tick off my own little list in my head. And I think this will be a fun car to do it in, to see if it's up to the challenge. Any car that ends up in my household during the Christmas holidays tends to do a lot of kilometres, a lot of highway kilometres, and a lot of just general country road Ks as well. And that's been the case exactly with this Tank 300. We've put a couple of thousand Ks on this car just about over the break, spent a lot of time with the family, all loaded up and that sort of thing. One major issue for me is undoubtedly the lane keep assistance setup here. They call it ELK, emergency lane keep, and in particular on roads like I'm on at the moment, actually, country roads where the markings aren't so good or barely visible at all, it just doesn't work very well. It's really, really annoying, and you can almost get into a kind of tug of war with the car as it thinks it's trying to pull you out of the lane, or it thinks you're driving dangerously. You're not, you're sitting in the middle of the lane, but you start to sort of claw at each other. It is a bit annoying. You can turn it off. It takes a few button presses on the infotainment to turn it off. It's not an easy thing to do, time and time again. However, it is software, so I'm really hoping that GWM can hopefully calibrate this a bit better for Australian conditions. Around town, it's not as bad. At lower speeds, it's not as bad, but at highway speeds, and when you're on country roads where the markings go from being not very good to not there at all, that's when you start to have issues. So fingers crossed GWM can sort that out in the future, because otherwise this Tank 300 isn't too bad of a car overall. Around town, on the highway, it's pretty comfortable. That's a big thing for me, I think. And the ride quality, I mean, there's a lot of body roll going on. It's definitely not a sports car or anything like that. Steering is not vague, but I mean, you're not going to be pumping this thing through corners. It's a four-wheel drive at the end of the day. So if you come to it from that point of view, this thing does feel surprisingly well sorted overall, I think. The 2-litre turbocharged petrol engine, it's got enough punch for the job. It's no rocket ship, but it's fairly smooth and responsive. And the 8-speed gearbox, it's a lazy unit, which probably isn't too bad of a thing. It's always chasing the highest gear possible. That's the ELK going off there at the moment, tugging at the wheel a little bit as well, even though I'm well within my lane at the moment. But I think this engine and gearbox combination does work well for the application. It's already in 6th gear at the moment. I'm doing 60 k's an hour. Once you're up in 8th at 100 k's an hour, you're doing under 2,000 RPM. So the spread of gears is quite nice, and it keeps things nice and quiet. And in terms of fuel economy, I've been averaging as good as 12 litres per 100 and as bad as 15 when you're doing a bit more town driving or a bit more loaded driving and that sort of thing. So not too bad, I think, overall, and we'll get a better idea of overall fuel economy a bit more accurately as this review goes on. But with all the family loaded in the car, punching our way up and down the highways and that sort of thing, loading the car up, this has been a good and mostly comfortable companion. And it's a lot better when you turn off that lane keep assistance system, let me tell you. Now, we've already had this Tank 300 on the road for about 3 months and have logged up around 3,000 kilometers on the odometer. We've been on the highway, around town, off-road, loaded up and with the family during our time so far. But we've got a lot more questions of our own to delve into with the car over the coming months. But we also want to hear from you, our readers, about what you want to know. We're especially interested to hear questions if you're considering getting one of these vehicles in the future. So fire your questions through to us and we will do our best to answer them. Or if you have struck the Tank 300 off your list, or you've never even considered one for a certain reason, let us know why, because we would be keen to know the reasons.